everybody.
I just found the keys to a city. The beats are big and the lights are pretty. So why can't we go to the busy where the dreams are in the sky?
And that's There You Are by Pogo. And yes, here we are. Welcome to Lost Mannerisms. Today is Sunday, July 28th, 2019. I'm your host, Forrest.
And I'm Al.
And Al doesn't sound very excited to be here. So we're going to try to make him excited. We're going to tell you what we're going to talk about today. On today's show, we talk about guns. We talk about some history about the Second Amendment, some breakdown of commonly misrepresented statistics, how to be safe with them, how to be safe if you find one, how to work with them, how to cook with them. Now, I for some reason, I remember a scene from the movie Atlantis, the Disney cartoon movie, one of the greatest Disney cartoons ever made, where the dynamite guy, Vinny's sitting there talking about, oh, and then I just started like dynamite, you know, I learned how to do all sorts of things with it, how to blow stuff up, how to blow more stuff up, how to cook with it, I remember that, and I spent an hour looking for that today and could not find it. I would have been better off watching the movie.
Yeah.
Because it was a very good movie. But today's drink of the week is Teeling Irish Whiskey. Again, we've had it on the show before, but we thought it was good for this conversation. It's aged in rum casks. It's quite delicious. Cheers. Alfred, what are you smoking?
I'm smoking a Patron something generic. One of their regular ones.
Oh.
It's from Little Taste of Cuba.
Oh.
Yeah, a place that they always stock like boxes of just kind of unlabeled Padrones.
Have they stepped up their game at all or no?
How so?
Like, do they actually have decent cigars?
Their Padrones are always good.
When I first
they
started,
have like unlabeled ones though.
When I first started smoking, I was not happy with their selection. Maybe it's because it takes.
You would always get diesel cigars.
I've never bought a diesel cigar.
Oh no, it's Anthony that likes diesel cigars.
Yeah, I probably got a few in a case I just bought, but whatever, it happens.
Yeah, they just have a bad selection sometimes though.
And I am smoking a Gurkha Grand Reserve, which is aged in cognac.
I always liked those.
It is a nice.
They're sweet.
The cognac's up front.
Yeah, if you don't, I mean, if you want like a sophisticated cigar with a lot of layers, it's not for you. It's tasty though.
It is
a nice smoke. It's
very light. It's good. It's light. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But if you're looking to have a flavor profile in the beginning, and a flavor profile in the middle, and a flavor profile in the end, it's not it.
Honestly, I always had really good success with just kind of making my own, like, cognac-infused cigars.
Yeah, you did. Yours were... Whoa. Yours were pretty good.
Yeah,
so...
We're going to have to talk about that someday. Messing around with cigars.
We're going to try this new episode layout you and Anthony cooked up. Hopefully we can make this work. I need to force one of you guys to get video editing software so we can really make it work. But we are going to try this. So I only have one thing to cover on the news. It's pretty big.
A couple weeks ago, the Jim Beam factory caught on fire.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
That's a shame. That was July 3rd.
Yeah.
I almost drove my boat to a landlocked state just to drink from the river. But that's not the news I wanted to cover. The news I wanted to cover was this week. We had the Mueller hearing. Did you pay attention to this?
I've been getting bits and pieces of headlines. I've been otherwise occupied this week.
Would you care to expand or no?
On being otherwise occupied?
Yeah.
I was in the hospital.
Well, now you have to expand more because now people are going to worry about you. Our three viewers are going to be concerned.
Our 3 viewers are going to be concerned. No, I just had a minor surgery, and now I've got an open wound on my back.
Oh.
It's going to take a little bit to heal.
Delicious.
So if you see me sitting awkwardly, it's because I didn't take enough Percocet.
Because I have a lump in my back. Well, you just have to take one Percocet and drink
And
booze.
then drink, you're right.
It works well.
Disclaimer, don't do that.
Oh, really?
I think that's against
we
the
can't
little label
recommend
on the
anything.
bottle.
We can't recommend anything that's not on the label. So yes, don't do that. Don't do that at all. Anyway, the Mueller hearing. There's a couple big headlines that they've been running with. The biggest takeaway I've gotten from it was Mueller's job was to recommend prosecution or not. And in neither case did he recommend prosecution. Okay. He stated he didn't have enough evidence. In the actual underlying crime, the exact statement was, I believe it was Representative Collins asked him, is it true that you did not find enough evidence to conclusively link a crime to Trump? And Mueller said, yes, that's true. Another thing that was asked was, and it might have been Collins, but he said, were you ever hindered, stopped, prevented from your investigation? And Mueller said no. So basically they haven't been, they came out and he said there was no crime and no obstruction was even attempted. So then that gets into some of the other points that come up. And one of them was the Office of Legal Counsel's information. And somebody asked him, would you, if it wasn't for the OLC directive, would you have chosen to, it was not the exact question, but would you have would you have recommended prosecution? Mueller said yes. And people are running with this headline, but the interesting thing is this was broken up into two parts.
Mueller keeps flipping back and forth.
On
honestly,
that one?
On everything. From what I've read, and admittedly it's not a lot, I've been trying to ignore it, but he has been making his official stance that we couldn't find enough evidence. But then whenever anyone pushes him on it, he says, well, just because we couldn't find enough evidence doesn't mean nothing happened, and maybe I would have chosen to prosecute. And then people say, well, so then there was enough evidence, and he goes, no, there was not enough evidence. So he's not giving... And
this is where it becomes, where you start to get into some of the conspiracies on it. And, yes, there's been a lot of back and forth.
I just don't think no one wants to take responsibility for it, one way or another. Whatever's going on, he just doesn't want to have his name attached to it.
Right. Well, that's where it gets really neat and into some of the questions in the later session of the first few minutes that the second session opened. Mueller said, "Hold up, I'd like to make a correction in response to the OLC decision. That was not what I meant to say. If there was enough evidence, I would have prosecuted." So what he's actually been saying is he has not exonerated Trump.
Right.
But exoneration has never been the job of any leg of the prosecution. Exoneration is basically when it goes to court and your lawyer says, because you can't be tried for the same crime twice. If the jury finds you not guilty because your lawyer fought it, the lawyer is the person who exonerated you of the crime.
Right.
So, and that's where, now this was the last quote I really wanted to get to anyway, so thank you for bringing this up, was somebody asked him, has there ever been a case where the Department of Justice has exonerated someone due to a lack of evidence? And he said, no. And then the guy gets into, isn't our legal system set up to innocent until proven guilty, and you have not proven anything yet? And Mueller was like, well, yeah. So we got a couple takeaways, and we got a couple key, and there was one where it was like, the question was asked, could you choose to prosecute? Could someone choose to prosecute the president after? And Mueller was like, yeah. because they asked like a legal definition question, and Mueller answered it. So I think that you might have a reasonable point. It seems like there might be something going on where somebody's pulling a lever. But those were some of the big quotes, and I know there was a couple others on the other side that they thought they won, but you haven't heard that much about it ever since the day after the hearing.
We'll see where it goes. I'm not honestly paying attention too much to the election cycle. I'll pay attention to it when we get in closer to the election, and
we could have a good big debate on that.
I'm sure we
That'll
can.
be,
we'll need more people for that, though.
Yeah, we might need to get a group of people and have a powwow on that. So that'll be interesting. So we're going to take a really quick break. I don't know what our time is, so we're breaking our segments up smaller. So we're going to take a break. That was our intro. This is all. You only get this if you watch the full episode. So now nobody else is going to get this. Which is why we're actually bringing you the gun episode.
Yes, that we've thought about for a while. The gun episode, we always talk about.
Well, we have a couple gun episode plans, but this one was...
I feel like we're starting to get to the core of talking about fun things. Guns and cigars and whiskey. And that's a good combination.
Yeah, I'm glad we took out most of the news. It is nice to hit on one piece of news like that and be able to talk about it for 5 minutes instead of talking about it for 1 minute and, oh my god, we got to get to the next thing. Like, although the guy getting attacked by... The guy fist fighting a buffalo was pretty funny.
That was a good one.
So, anyway, let's talk about one of the things that makes America great. We wanted to give you the What Makes America Great episode, but technology, man. So, Alfred, I believe this is... I'll let you read us in a second. I think one of the things that makes America great is the Second Amendment. I think it is the second most important constitutional amendment, arguably.
It is second on the list. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know if they ordered them in order of importance, but...
I think... I don't know that they ordered it of a thing. Actually, let's hold that thought, because the amendment making everyone equal was pretty...
That was a big one.
That was pretty important.
Arguably, that one was very important.
Also, arguably, that amendment wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the First and Second Amendments.
I mean, arguably, that amendment wasn't necessary. Wouldn't have been necessary because there was nothing.
It's not. It's that if there wasn't such an issue in the history over that, because England introduced slavery to us. Nobody likes to talk about that. Hey, England never had any slaves.
Pass that off
England
onto them.
Introduced slavery into every colony they had. Oh, but they didn't have slaves in England. Get out of here, you British cucks. Oh, God, I used cuck on air.
Oh, jeez.
Go get your teeth aligned. Anyway, part of the early Bill of Rights... One of the second things they thought of putting on the list, this amendment was ratified in 1791. Now, because of that, we can't exactly go and ask someone, hey, what did you mean by this? So we have to look at historical context and the writings of the people involved. Alfred, will you read to me the Second Amendment?
Is it written down somewhere?
It is written on our script. You are not good at reading our scripts.
I don't like reading. Why don't you read it?
No, you're going to read it.
Ashing on my script. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
It's a little bit of a clunky quote, isn't it? There's a lot of commas trying to prove things.
There's 3 commas.
There's 3. But for what it is, it seems like it's a little clunky
I
wording?
think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah? What do you think it is?
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Interesting. I see you've heard of the Heller versus DC case. So that is... This amendment has been broken down basically into two parts by the most recent Supreme Court ruling on it. And I believe this was rightfully so. If we look at the historical context, but what they said was a well-regulated militia was the preemptive clause. Like, it had nothing to really do with it. It was kind of there because if you look at all the founding documents talking about how everybody was in the militia.
Yeah.
So that quote is actually broken from a James Madison quote from 1789. And it was something he said, and he was so involved in the writing of the Constitution that he is one of the ones we really look to for constitutional analysis. But his full quote that sounds closest to what the Second Amendment was, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Period. Next sentence. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of people trained to arms is the most natural defense of a free country. So those kind of overlap, right? Where are you at today?
I hate talking about the Second Amendment because it is a gray area. There's no way to... It says both. You could make an argument either way. You could make an argument that a well-regulated militia is kind of one of the core of the Second Amendment, or you could argue that the right to bear arms is the core of the argument, and one is secondary to the other. One has to be secondary to the other.
Yeah. Well, that's where you have to look at the historical context.
And I think that...
For instance, part of the militia stuff was you had to bring your own gun to the militia.
That's true. We don't have to do that anymore.
So,
Last time I checked, it's frowned upon to bring guns to military bases.
Well, militias weren't really military bases. The militia was... People don't necessarily grasp the concept of a militia.
To be fair though, the militia of that time would have effectively been the National Guard.
No.
Yeah, or the National Guard in the state. You know, those National Guards were not federal, were not under the federal
they would be
government.
Organized like that. But the militia at the time was not like the National Guard.
But the National Guard wasn't always under the federal government.
Right. And so what the thing was, the militia, the state controlled it, yes. The state, gave the marching orders, was in charge of housing when people were there, but you still had to go to the militia with a gun.
Right.
You had to bring your firearm to the militia. And that's a big thing to note. Because if you don't have the right to own firearms, how are you going to bring your gun to the militia? So that's why it's so important to look at these historical contexts in the writings.
I think in this case, I always felt that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed is the core of this statement, because looking at that time, they obviously had in mind what you were saying, that people had to have their own guns to come together as a militia, but I don't think their intent was to necessarily just provide a bunch of people who were self-armed to then form a militia or army for the state. I think they really were interested in people being armed to protect themselves and to prevent tyranny, which, I think there's a good argument against, the realistic possibility of an uprising against the U.S. government. I don't think that's realistic, but I think, but that's the reason why it's there. Yeah, that's the reason why it's there. But I think there's still
if we talk about that, that's probably that's a full episode because there's so many factors to that. Because it takes into account how restricted the Second Amendment has been now too.
Yeah, but I think the core of the Second Amendment for most Americans is the ability to have guns and be responsible with their own guns and to do with them what they will.
So that's an interesting thing to bring up. Responsibility.
I think that's one of the
that's huge. One of the founders' writings is included that every right, and they all kind of agreed with this principle. Every right gives you an extreme amount of responsibility.
Well, right, because your rights can infringe on someone else's rights.
And not only that, but like
shooting someone infringes on their right.
Shooting on someone infringes on their right. Murder's illegal, right?
It is.
Right? Yeah, we'll get into some of that too when we get into statistics.
But it doesn't even have to be murder. It can just be negligence or stupidity.
Negligence, stupidity. But even with stuff like the right to free speech, you have a right to use the word, and if I knew how to bleep stuff out, I'd actually say the word here. But you have the right to use the N-word. You have the right to use...
You have the right to yell fire in a crowded building.
Yeah.
And there will still be repercussions.
There will be repercussions.
And there's a lot of things that aren't covered under free speech.
That's a fun... You were actually always allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater.
Well...
Especially if there's a fire.
There might be a fire.
So now the thing with the First Amendment, the responsibility with the First Amendment comes to truth.
Yeah.
And that's why we have laws against slander. And our laws against slander used to be much more lenient, I believe is the word. Like if you were in public office and someone said you had an illegitimate wife or something, you could actually sue them for slander. Now you'd have to prove that they were
untrue or malicious.
No, you have to prove that it was untrue and malicious. Yeah. It used to just be, is it demeaning the character of the person?
Well, that still holds true for private citizens.
Yes, but the private citizen one, as it's written now, used to be for everyone.
We're getting off track. We're talking about the First Amendment.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about how the Second Amendment applies. So there are significant responsibilities with the Second Amendment. By having the right to a firearm, just like you have the responsibility to the truth. You have in the First Amendment, by having a right to the firearm, you have the responsibility to be safe with it.
Yeah. To store it properly.
To know
how to use it.
To know how to use it. To not leave it out for kids to get it. To not
do illegal things
shoot Dick Cheney in the face.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someone thought they had the responsibility to shoot Dick Cheney in the face, but...
Dick Cheney shot someone else.
Oh, was Dick Cheney shot someone else?
Dick Cheney shot someone in an accident.
Yeah.
Now you want to get into a conspiracy theory there.
So, now, a big thing to note was more writing from James Madison, actually when he was president, there was a letter that was presented, and that's still floating around, and some people get bent out of shape because, it was during the War of 1812. Well, yes. It was around that time. It wasn't exactly then. And this is another thing that's big for the Second Amendment, shall not be infringed. The citizens in the military had similar weapons. Now, it says the right to bear firearms, to bear arms. I think there is a conversation that can be had of weapons of mass destruction.
There are limits, I think, reasonable limits.
There's reasonable limits that actually don't affect the Second Amendment. I believe that the Automatic Firearms Act is an infringement. And I think
that's an interesting one because you can go out and purchase an automatic.
Isn't that interesting? You can still purchase an automatic firearm.
Yeah.
Now, the really stupid part of that bill is you can't buy an automatic gun if it's made after 1984.
Yeah, but that was a whole nother... I think a lot of the Second Amendment runs into... There's so much conflict around it because unfortunately there have been changes in our society in our time. We live in a state that is pretty densely populated. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people. There's cities.
But there was still cities, lots of people then. Okay, yes, maybe they weren't as full as they are now, but they were still a lot of people in the cities.
I think, though, just the level of people, like, if you think about someplace like, I think New Jersey is a perfect example. We have a population density just in our state. You know, our state alone, New York City, Philadelphia, Jersey City, have populations that dwarf entire states out in the Midwest.
Let me stop you there. States were allowed to regulate firearms.
Right.
So we're talking about the Second Amendment in the broad context.
Yeah.
But if a state wanted to do something, they were allowed to do it.
And they still are, as
And
we
they still
see
are,
regularly.
Yep. But you look at, like, especially when you get to the automatic guns, they had those in the past. They had semi-autos.
Yeah,
They
sort of.
weren't what they are now.
They had the idea. Let's say they knew they were coming.
No, they had them. They had automatic flintlock rifles.
They had things that were sort of like that sort of kind of worked. But my point is, while the technology wasn't there
George
on the mass
Washington
market,
ordered, yeah, and I think they canceled the order, but he ordered 1,000 of the automatic flintlock rifles. They were 7-shot automatic flintlock rifles. You pulled the trigger and...
yeah, and, you know, they had that kind of thing. So the way I look at that is, I don't think you can make the argument that, the technology was the same, but I think you can make the argument that they knew where technology was developing, and I would argue that they would probably look at the guns we have today and go, wow, that's different, but...
Yeah. Well, these guys were badasses.
Yes.
America was literally founded by outlaws. Borrowing a quote from one of my friends. And, if they had Thompson submachine guns back then, you'd see them walking around with violin cases. They let private citizens own cannons. Now, there were laws on, you can't fire it within a mile of the city limits, but you were allowed to own a cannon and use a cannon
you still are.
as you saw fit.
You still
But that was, the pinnacle of military technology then.
That's true.
So why can't we own the pinnacle of firearm technology now?
I mean, I would argue that we can. What can you go out and reasonably, as a private citizen, not purchase today? With the
M4?
again, you're right. With the exception of new manufacture, which is
new manufacturer, cutting edge military technology. I can't go buy an M4.
You can go out and buy a minigun, as long as it was manufactured before.
But I can't go buy a new M4. I can't go buy a SCAR.
Well,
I can't
you could
go buy
a firearms license. You get a.
But that still applies. The 1984 law still applies.
No, not if you're a manufacturer distributor.
Well, okay. If you're a manufacturer, all right. Let's take a break. Let's reload our drinks. Let's get into the statistics. Hopefully the camera's still rolling. This is gonna be a long episode, Alfred.
You're new around here, so I'll go easy on you.
Alfred, what is the CDC estimate for gun deaths? Give me just the rough number per year.
You have numbers written here that I assume
Alfred, you know what the number is off the top of your head. Give it to me.
Well, but this doesn't make sense. So this is
That's different.
500,000 3 million? That's why I'm asking.
That has nothing to do with the number I'm asking.
Oh, 14,000?
No, that's not it either.
Yes, you said
gun
33,000.
It is above.
There we go.
It is around 33,000 per year. Alfred, you knew that number.
No, I didn't. I
Really?
had no idea. Well, why would I know that off the top of my head?
Because that's the number that everyone totes for gun deaths.
I don't pay attention to that.
Like CNN, the CDC gives it. Everybody totes that number for gun deaths.
I don't listen to those things. I gotta be honest, I don't listen to a lot of things on this. I don't care about the gun control debate.
Why?
Because I think both sides are reactionary and overblown. I think the NRA has become a shell of its former self. And I think on the opposite side of the aisle, you have a bunch of people who don't know anything about guns who are trying to make dumb, ineffective laws. I mean, look at the state of New Jersey. We have all these stupid laws. There's still plenty of,
Deaths.
gun deaths. And honestly, most of them are gang violence or just...
I believe it is a number, let me give you the statistical deviation of plus or minus 10%. It's something like 75% of all gun murder is gang related.
Of course it is, because, frankly, they're either gang related or, unfortunately, domestic violence related.
Well,
and, generally, you're not going out and shooting your neighbor for no reason.
And with...
Not that any reason would be good, but...
Both of those, it's kind of the question is, well, how much are you really going to solve by regulating the firearms of...
I think that is the key,
Because if you look at domestic violence, okay, those are normally arguably crimes of passion.
I wouldn't even go that far. I would say that it's really an issue of trying to treat the symptoms and not the disease.
Well, yeah.
We have gun
know
violence.
That. We know
exactly, but we have gun
but
violence.
we got to get to that point in our discussion.
But we don't need to beat around the bush.
Well, let me beat around the bush a little bit.
All right.
I want to have a little bit of fun. So the 33,000 statistic, and put a placeholder right here in domestic violence and gang violence. Gun deaths per year, 33,000. Majority of that number?
Gangs. Oh, no. What are we talking about?
The majority of the 33,000 gun deaths per year.
You go on with this. I'm on a different train of thought here.
Okay, so then you hold our train of thought. The majority of that is suicide. So now if we look...
So mental health issues.
Yeah. If we look at this numerically, though, across other nations, Japan has some of the strictest gun control laws in the world.
Very high suicide
and some
rate.
of the highest suicide rates in the world. The suicide argument doesn't work well because,
there's obviously
jump out this
different
window.
things. There's different things we need to do to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And regulating guns is
rope.
a band-aid.
How are we going to regulate rope?
It's
so
mental health services.
You lock that number off the top. And I have to
agree.
apologize. 2017 was a high year for gun homicides. For a lot of reasons.
I think, though, in general, it's been trending down over
Yes.
the past 20 or 30 years.
Yes.
So
all crime in the United States has been trending downward since the 60s.
Yeah.
So, however you want to slice that, but we had a spike last year.
Yes.
For firearm homicides. Now, there's a year difference in my numbers. So, bear with me. CDC published information before the FBI published crime rates. So, firearm homicides, there's 14,542 and probably a quarter. Just because that's how statistics normally work. So, an interesting thing to note is a homicide is not... I want to puff on my cigar, and I said this in the room, what is a homicide not?
Not necessarily...
Yeah?
A murder.
A crime.
A crime.
A homicide is not necessarily a crime. In the firearm homicide statistics, they use police use of force incidents. They use
self-defense.
They use self-defense, justified homicide. So both of those are typically justified homicides. We find some police use their...
So we need to look at unjustified homicides.
So we need to look at unjustified homicide.
To get a good...
Which is also just called murder.
Yes. Because also, an interesting point is we're not taking... Even if we magically made all guns in the U.S. disappear, the cops are still going to have guns.
Yes. And...
That's another discussion, but...
Yeah. But the firearm murders in 2016 was 11,004. So you've almost lopped 2/3 of that number off already.
Yeah.
So now another thing we have to consider when we get into the gun debate. So now we're looking at 11,000 murders that are unjustified, and then you apply the gang violence. Okay, but let's just say and people are going to have contentions with this number. But the CDC published this data. The CDC used this data point. People say, oh, the CDC haven't researched firearms in years. No. Obama signed an executive order allowing the CDC.
I trust the CDC. I think they generally have reliable data.
So they published this as their accepted data. And people have contentions on this. In the context of 300,000 crimes involving firearms. So there's approximately 300,000 crimes. Now, something...
So that could be possessing a firearm when you're not supposed to.
That could be... Stealing a gun. There was someone in New York who just defended themselves with a firearm from a home intruder, and it was the dad's gun. The dad passed away, and New York has very strict laws. That could be someone committed a crime and legally was allowed to carry a firearm, but because they committed a crime,
became illegal.
The firearm became illegal, or because something they did was because they walked into a bar, it became a crime. So the CDC estimates that there are 500,000 to 3 million defensive gun uses per year. And that range is so big because people don't necessarily report on stuff like that. So they're using crime information. So that ranges from someone saying, hey, go away, maybe not even having a real gun on them.
Yeah.
To
shooting someone.
To, hey, go away, to shooting someone, to shooting at someone, to let me index this gun. We now have some information context. I'll let you pull up what you were going to say before.
Are we rolling back around to the other?
Yes.
So my biggest problem with the gun control debate that we've been talking about is that I think these numbers are so difficult to pin down. I think it's really difficult to compare the numbers in the U.S. to numbers in any other countries because we're not in those countries. And the U.S. is a huge country with radically different geography and populations. Can I pause you there? Yeah.
Interesting thing I noticed the other day. There are some countries that don't report crimes. They don't report crime statistics, and these are developed countries until someone has been convicted of that crime. So if I shot Alfred and ran away and went to Peru and they never found me, they would not report that crime.
So I think that kind of ties in with what I'm saying. It's very difficult to make direct comparisons between countries, and honestly, I don't think it's always a meaningful comparison. It's something that I know you know this. I sit in a lab all day and do a lot of data science, and that's one of the most difficult things to deal with. How do you compare to it? You're constantly faced with this problem of comparing data from two different places when the data wasn't collected the same way. It may not have been. They may not even be looking at the exact same thing. So you get these numbers that are sort of kind of comparable, but rarely paint the whole picture. And when we look at these gun deaths per year in the U.S., it can tell us something on the basic level that yes, people are dying because of guns, but the solution is not then to get rid of guns. The solution is to now dig deeper into the data and see what it's actually telling us.
And we see that because you look at the differences, and you have U.S. had, whatever we said, 11,000 firearm murders. And then the U.K. had something like under 200.
Right. So
at first you're like, wow, the firearms really did a lot. But then the crime rates, the victimhood rates.
Right, so how many regular murders are there?
The rape rates in the United Kingdom are 3 times higher than that in America. The crime rates are twice as high.
Really?
Yeah. So, and it's not only... So, and that's where, you look at the defensive gun use number and you can say, okay, lives were saved. No, you can't say how many lives were saved because... You know what? if someone gets raped, they're not dead.
That's true.
It's
Yes, but
probably the worst crime that can happen to someone without killing someone,
right.
but they aren't dead, so that doesn't reflect in the murder statistics.
That's true. So exactly. So there's this huge issue of how do you draw any reasonable conclusions from these numbers that don't always tell the whole story. And I think looking at the gun deaths versus actual unjustified homicides tells a big story. What it really tells us is 2/3 of these gun deaths are super preventable just by having better mental health facilities, having better support in the communities and stuff. And right off the bat, that's not an issue of these people had access to guns. It's an issue of these people wanted to kill themselves.
And a lot of the people didn't have access to guns.
That's another
which is a
thing.
big thing to note. Because, you know what, let's go back, let's look back in our country's history. People used to be allowed to bring guns into school.
Yeah.
Like high-powered rifles in high school. People would make stocks for them in wood shop. People would work on the guns at school. There was training on how to handle guns at school. We got rid of that. We moved beyond that. Okay, sure. Now you aren't teaching people what to do, which I think is going to be our segment today. If someone walked up, and we've kind of kept this theme going, if someone walked up and found this single-action revolver on the counter, what do you do to keep it safe? We'll jump right into that in a minute. But they used to cover stuff like that in school. And you got away from that.
I think gun safety is a big thing that isn't really addressed anymore. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the responsibility of of having these rights. There is we can't have the right to bear arms. We can't have all these guns and then not teach people how to store them safely, what to do if you come across an unsecured firearm.
Which is, fortunately, one of the things the NRA is actually really good at. The NRA...
Yes, they try.
The NRA harps on their safety programs. And yes, maybe they're not the greatest, but they're basic. And they cover, if you came across a loaded handgun on the table as a kid, they tell you what to do. But let's get back to...
I think that brings up an interesting point because I live in up kind of in the New York metropolitan area, and so a lot of the people I encounter, or a lot of my friends, have like zero experience with guns.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things I've noticed is people's fear and discomfort with guns usually comes from a lack of understanding and also kind of an awareness that they don't know what to do if they found a gun, and that makes people uncomfortable, and rightly so. It's a weapon. People are afraid of them because they don't want the responsibility. They don't know what to do with them.
Somewhere down the road, people were taught to be afraid of the unknown.
But I don't think it's. But my point is...
No, it rolls into your point.
Yes,
We were taught to be afraid of the unknown, and then the only thing they know about firearms is in a movie somebody dies, in the news somebody dies. But they are dangerous, and I think that it's a reasonable fear. If you have never had anyone show you how to safely handle a firearm... If I didn't know how to use a firearm and I came across a gun lying around, I'd be afraid of it because how can I prevent myself or someone else from being injured? At a minimum, you should know not to grab it.
Well,
at a minimum,
people are dumb sometimes.
And if this was their basic knowledge that was given, don't touch it, call someone.
It's just, in my experience, those same people who are really afraid and uneasy around guns... As soon as you show them how to safely handle firearms, they have a good time. And I don't think I've had an experience with someone who was previously wary or maybe not aggressively anti-gun, but certainly didn't like them. I've never had the experience of that person not coming around and saying, like, well, now that I've handled one and now that I kind of, like, see how to use them safely and I see what can be done with them, I understand. Like, I'm comfortable knowing that people have them as long as
Yeah.
there's safety involved, and as long as people, are responsible with them. And I think that's a big part of it, It's the safety and responsibility that we do have.
That's a
We're
good.
going to have guns.
That's a good point to close this segment on.
Sure.
We're going to go into our own safety video, and then we're just going to have a couple quick closing remarks. Welcome to Lost Mannerisms. I'm your host, Forrest. Today you're getting a little bit of a different perspective for our gun safety video. You get a little POV action here. Don't get too excited though. So what we have is a single action revolver. And as always with handling the firearm, our general safety rules apply. Finger off the trigger. Keep it pointed in a safe direction. Don't point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. And the other regular safety rules you have to practice with firearms. But this is going to be our normal quick video, what to do if you were to find it on a counter and laying out, and to keep other people safe. So, if you noticed, with a revolver, the cylinder spins when you cock it. The neat thing about a single action revolver is if it's uncocked, the gun will not go off. So you just have to be aware of that when you're handling it. You have to be aware not to pull the hammer back, because if you pull the hammer back and then pull the trigger, it is going to shoot. So the cylinder doesn't spin, and there's a button here, but that we'll talk about at a later date. That pulls kind of the cylinder axle out. But we're not getting that deep into it. So in order to make the cylinder move, you have to open this hatch on the right side of the gun. So you slide that open, and you'll see we are in fact loaded. So our next step here is going to be, there's this little ramrod that's meant for ejecting empty cartridges and loaded ones. So what you do is you line the bullet up in that groove with the ramrod. You take this lever, and without putting your finger in front of the barrel, you push this lever in, and that will push the bullet out of the cylinder. So you do that. Now I only have 4 bullets in here, but you'd want to do that normally 6 times. Don't ask me why I only have 4 bullets, and you just want to spin this through a couple times and make sure you are completely empty and safe. Some revolvers will carry more than 6 rounds, some revolvers might carry less. But this is just your general safety if you were to find this. And that's all I got for you. There's single action revolvers are relatively simple, safe guns, and as far as handguns go, so catch us back in the studio. Have you noticed that?
We'll discuss this when the camera isn't rolling.
Or this is going to be hopefully shorter. So I think I have a list of manly products that we were supposed to talk about, and
yeah, I was going to say I noticed.
Because we didn't get to them.
Right.
I think we're not going to get to them this week either. This episode's been running pretty long.
It has.
So I will say, we told our rugged reviewer it was time to show up again. I think they got lost.
I think they had heat stroke.
They probably had heat stroke. I'm probably having heat stroke right now, but
that helmet's hot now.
That helmet is hot. With our changes and the heat, it's really been hard to find them. I don't think they have a cell phone.
They don't.
So yeah, I tried calling. They put a number in my phone as rugged, and I wound up calling. I don't even want to say what I wound up calling. So
the last time I heard them on a cell or saw them on a cell phone, they had one of those old flip phones. I don't think they have a charger for it.
Oh, so they were just talking?
Yeah.
Like they had it. They were just talking.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think it was on. I think it died at least a year or so ago. There was a battery in it, I think. But
maybe. So, I had a couple closing thoughts, and I'll stick this with the people who've been sticking around the whole time. Crime rates have been down in the 60s, since the 60s. Shootings have been down. Everything's been down. We had an uptick in the mass shootings. Now, the total shootings is still trending downward. But the numbers have kind of changed.
Yeah, they have changed.
So, if we didn't have these mass shooting incidents, we'd actually be significantly lower.
Yeah, so what's happened is crime has gone down, but we've seen these instances of, like you've been saying, these mass shootings, which is a worrying trend.
It's a worrying trend, and it's interesting because there are people that talk about the cause. People understand that this all started in, 2012? Sandy Hook?
Yeah, I would say
really
when
picked
the trend, I guess you'd call it a trend, kind of took off. Because that's an interesting point, which I guess is a discussion for another day. The technology, like the gun technology that we have, has not really substantially changed in 100 years. It's it's going to be 2020 soon. So if you think of 1920, is there anything that you think Bonnie and Clyde, they were running around with bars. I think
I would go a little bit narrower than that. The firearm technology has not significantly changed since the 50s.
Okay. So to me that says, is there a big change? Is it the firearms? Because I think there's also been a general trend of lower gun ownership in the country.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, not number of guns, but families that have guns. No, I think
still
the NRA. I think this is a stat from the NRA, tracking the number of families that have guns. I mean, it's not a substantial or a monumental decrease, but there is.
I might cut that out because I
mean, we can look it up, but it is true. I mean, that has to do more, I think, with larger populations in cities.
Yeah.
But the point of that is that arguably less people than ever have guns, and the gun technology is not substantially changed. So
more people have guns.
There are more people, a lower percentage of people.
But a lower
percentage of people have guns, and gun technology is not substantially changed, and crime rates have actually been going down. So to me, that says we actually have our gun situation in hand fairly well.
By the way, we will put the little caveat right here that crime rates and firearms have in no way ever been linked.
Well, but that's my point. So we seem to have, we seem as a nation to be trending in a relatively good direction with firearms.
Yeah.
To a point where I would say that over the past several decades, as a nation, we do frequently prove that we are responsible enough as a people to own and use firearms, and
So I think there's a couple big issues that we don't really want to get into today. I'd like to get people on who could get into this, but the schooling system has changed. The news media has changed. There has been, in the past 40 years, there have been significant overhauls of these things. And I think that what we're getting with the firearms is the value of human life isn't presented as much.
That's interesting.
And I know that it's really a move towards secularism and statism, and we can have this whole discussion. But if we take this short little quip from that the value of human life is gone. The morals are being depleted.
That's a different
conversation, but if you look at that, now you say, okay, well, a lot of families still have values. Like the nuclear family still...
I think we're getting off track with
this. Hold this thought. Just let me run with this for a couple seconds. So the families, there are families still teaching people values. But there are situations where not the whole family is there.
Okay.
And those people are adversely affected by the fact that our society doesn't push the value of human life. I'll keep it on that one point. But everyone else know that I mean more than this. But the value of human life, I mean the morals and everything, the value of human life not being pushed outside of the family. So when you get to that, you wind up with these couple people who are statistical anomalies, outliers, whatever you want to call them, from the norm. They don't get the normal values. And some other factor happens. So the Sandy Hook shooting, the guy killed his mother to get the firearm. The father was out of the life. The guy killed his mother to get the firearm. Okay. Copycat killers. A significant number of these shooters, Pulse nightclub, the one on the military base, I could keep going. A significant number of these shootings are people who would not pass a background check. But for some reason, the people reviewing the background checks approved it. The people, the Parkland shooting, the people who should have reported the crime that occurred before didn't report the crime.
Yeah.
So government failures, but I think government failures always are there. So there's a problem, like you were saying before, we're looking at treating the symptom.
Yeah.
And the problem exists outside of the symptom, but we're still trying to treat the symptoms. So I know you didn't want me to ramble on that, but what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I agree. I think this is the kind of issue that it's so political and so polarized at this point that it's very hard to come away with meaningful conclusions, because the truth is we don't really have a lot of good, solid information on, what causes these things, why these things happen. And there's research, some research, but there's not a lot, and a lot of the research is...
A part of the problem, though, is that you have... So the CDC can't look at it.
Right, the CDC produces numbers, the FBI produces numbers, and
so,
ultimately it's up to...
If the CDC has been banned from looking at it, the firearm stuff, because the CDC is a Center for Disease Control. So now you have private research companies who do this. And every time you look at these private research companies and try to quip one of their data points, people say, oh, they're just biased. And then it gets thrown under the table.
But that is the unfortunate problem, because this is so polarized. Honestly, it's hard to say, because this is such a polarized issue, because there's so much money on the line, because it's really hard to say.
There's money on the line.
It's hard to say, who is presenting really reasonable factual data. And on top of that, how do you get factual data? Because you can do research and you can show correlation with all kinds of things. I think there's always that classic study that shows ice cream sales correlate with homicides. I think that was the classic example. And so you can pull statistics and you can find correlations that don't necessarily mean anything. And that's one of the challenges with doing good science, because ultimately I think one of the paths to finding a real robust solution is the science behind it. How do we find out and identify what the...
Some people say the Earth is flat.
Well, some people do say the Earth is flat.
Why do we always poke fun at the flat earthers?
Low-hanging fruit.
On that, Lindmine, thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with us through this long episode. We hope we were informative.
Or at least entertaining.
At least entertaining.
I had fun. I got through my cigar.
I had a good time. Thank you.